All right, everybody. So today we have a special treat. First, I want to thank you guys for just tuning in here on Let's Get Real podcast. The biggest mission of this podcast is really just sharing stories of inspiration, hope, bringing it to you of people that have overcome, that are still going through regular struggles in their life. And we like to bring these messages, these stories to you just to provide value. And as I always say, even if one person gets something out of this, I think we've done our job. And I think today with the guest that I have, and it's Portia. Her name is Portia Louder. And if you haven't heard of her, I think you will start hearing about her. I've had the pleasure, my wife is actually, and we've actually read her book, Living Louder. And I was telling her when I opened it, man, the way she writes, it almost puts you into it. So I have to just start off by reading something from the book that like grabbed our attention. And it's going to get kind of into the message, and I'll be able to introduce you to Portia. And this first chapter of her book, and I'm just going to read a quick excerpt. Portia served, and I'll kind of go into it. She got a 7-year sentence. So in real estate, dealing with drug and addiction, had a family, married, kids. And this is a point where she's looking at going into prison. And I'll go into it right away. I was walking through the pain and suffering I spent years trying to avoid. For many years, I looked back at my life and felt like the best years were already spent. I felt blessed that I had a moment in time where everything was beautiful. My children were thriving. I was a growing photographer, and I was growing spiritually. I was grateful for the good years I had, but had no hope that I would feel that way again. I knew what it felt like to be too depressed to get out of bed. A depression so deep, an isolation so extreme that it hurt to breathe. Existing seemed too painful, but there were no alternatives. I fought for many years in hopes to win my freedom, only to find out that freedom was a gift from God that no one could take away from me. Freedom was something I had inside of me. And as painful as the 7-year sentence was, there was freedom in knowing. I mean, I honestly just got goosebumps again, just reading that. So I just want to get right into it. Portia, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to just chat with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean. Wow, you read that and I got goosebumps because it just took me right back to where I was. It's crazy how painful that was. So, yeah.
And that's one thing you did so great in your story of almost just making people feel like they were right there with you. And today you're right here with us. So I'd like to just I'd like to get right into it. Kind of tell us where everything started from, a little bit about you, and kind of getting right into that.
Okay, I will. And I'm going to go quick about in the beginning because I could tell, probably you as well, but I feel like I've lived 10 different lives. So, but I started out, I'm the oldest of 7 children, grew up in a small town here in Utah. My parents were entrepreneurial, but they were also kind of nonconformists. So we didn't have a lot of structure, but we had a lot of just playing, more creative type lifestyle. And when I got into my teen years, I really struggled. First, it was relationships. Then it was addiction. I started out just drinking and partying, and got pregnant young. And I remember
How old, by the way? I'm sorry.
What's that?
How old were you when you were pregnant?
I was 17 when I got pregnant the first time. So, and that's a hopeless feeling. I don't know how to, I have a lot of compassion for women that go through that, because looking at myself now, I'm like, oh my gosh, you had no idea what your worth was. Not that it's a wrong thing to have children, but I was just, I didn't see myself going to college or accomplishing anything at that point. I actually moved into a low-income apartment, and then I had 2 children, was a single mother, and my parents moved to the city in Utah from that small town. And I remember the first time I went to the city thinking, there's a chance for me here. I could get a job, I could do something with my life. And so I moved up and I started working as a photographer. And, that was the first time that I really had some confidence in myself. Things were going pretty good. And then still, I struggled with relationships. I actually ended up getting pregnant again. And the third time I was really scared because I was old enough to know that I wasn't doing very well and that my children deserved better. I wasn't married at that point, and I wanted my kids to have a father, and I wanted a better future for us. And so I actually chose to give that child up for adoption. And it was a really painful experience, but it was also, I was blessed, I was super blessed. It was the first time I got on my knees and I really asked God to help me because it was bigger than me. I couldn't do it. had a great experience finding the right family and going through that. But after I had the child, I just felt totally empty. I didn't get counseling, tried to go back to work, and started using drugs, prescription drugs, in a big way. It was on for me. And I actually eventually went from prescription drugs to street drugs. And within a year and a half, I hit a serious bottom. I came home late one night. I'd been out partying all night, and my oldest son, who was 9 at the time, had just been sitting by the window crying for me the whole night. And my mom she'd given up. She just looked at me like, there's nothing left for you. Like, if this isn't enough, I don't know what it would be for you to change your life. And that night I asked God, I said, just give me the ability to never use again. I don't care if I'm ever happy. I'm so tired of hurting the people I love. It was just a prayer of, please, anything but this. And at that point, I went to someone I knew across the street that could help me. I didn't really know him before, but I was desperate, and I knew that he could get me involved. I didn't know anything about the 12 steps of recovery, but he did. And he got me involved in AA and NA, which is the 12-step addiction program. And I remember walking in, and the coolest thing happened for me at that point. The first thing I learned when I walked in there was that I had a problem and I wasn't alone. Like, I have a serious problem. It's not just me that I can't quit, or my willpower isn't enough. This is bigger than me. Like, this is because up to that point, I'd never had anything that I just couldn't quit. And in this case, I had promised myself over and over I wouldn't do it, and I just right back at it. And so I heard people talk about going through exactly what I was going through, but they had like 2 years clean. So I found out I had a problem, and I found out there was a solution. Like, something is working here for these people. And I got the book, and I worked the steps, and I went to meetings, and I really just didn't trust myself. So I listened to what other people said to do, and I did it. And I guess as well, because you're in recovery, but what happened for me was I found joy. Like, for the first time in, my whole life, I became an unselfish person. Like, I learned the basic principles to happiness, which are, serve. And I realized, I'm like, no wonder I'm so unhappy. I'm just not a nice person, and I got honest. I did all these things that most people just know they have to do to be happy. And life gets really good. I mean, it's amazing. I was at a meeting last night, and how we were talking about that, just desperation. Like, I just don't want to die. I'm so tired. I don't care if anything good happens. I don't think I'll ever feel joy again. And then within a year, it was like my whole life turned around. I started a photography business that really took off. My husband and I were married, and he adopted my 2 kids. And life just got beautiful. We bought a home,
Right. Things started to change. Yeah. My wife and I we just celebrated my 31st birthday yesterday, and my wife and I were sitting in bed, and it's cool because I'm looking at your video, and you got your family in the background. I'm looking at mine. My family's in the background. We were just talking about, 5 years ago, my wife is in recovery as well. And thinking of just about who we used to be, and then who we are now. And I think a lot of addicts, we used to struggle with our identity. We thought that's who we were, but take away the drugs and alcohol and for me, I was a thief. I was stealing. I didn't care about anybody. Take away the drugs and alcohol and put a program of recovery in our lives. And all of a sudden we become servants. It's the complete opposite, and that sounds like what it's like the opposite of who you found in your identity.
Yeah, it was miraculous. It was just to learn to live a principle-centered life. It was like, it just turns everything around, right? And for me, I guess the unfortunate part was that I got so busy with my company. I started a business that went from like 20 weddings to 40 weddings to, within a couple of years, I was doing 200 weddings a year, which is a lot, and I hired other employees, and I built a new home to accommodate for the studio that I needed. And then I bought an outside studio, and I just really was growing so fast.
This was while you were in recovery, right?
This is while I was in recovery. Yeah, I had 4.5 years in recovery. Things were going pretty good. But keep in mind too, like, I'm trying to do the mom thing the right way, and that was amazing. I mean, I'm getting up early. I was actually like reading scriptures with my kids before school. I was involved. I was showing up in their lives. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. Like these other women here that are doing the mom thing don't realize that for me, this is like the greatest accomplishment of all times, you know? It
I
was
can
just so
understand.
cool. And so things were going good. I was extremely busy. And then Chad and I had our first baby. My pregnancy was pretty rough. I was sick through the pregnancy, and I was working from morning to night and up early in the morning trying to get picture stuff ready and prepare for the day and get my kids off. And then right after I had him, my back went out and I had to have back surgery and was prescribed narcotics. And I mean, looking back, it was totally my responsibility to tell the doctors, you know, that I was an addict, but I didn't. And I just kept using, and then I started using more. And I battled it a little bit. It ended up that I got pregnant again right away. I wasn't expecting that. So our two middle kids are 18 months apart. And I wasn't using through the pregnancy, but right after I had her, I started using again. And at that point in time, I hired nannies. We moved to a new home, and the market in real estate was just going wild. And I remember thinking, I've got to slow down. Like, logically, wouldn't you think that you could slow down, right? But not me. Like, I decide real estate is going to help me slow down.
The things
You know?
we think, right?
Yeah, especially when you're using. I mean, my grandiosity was in full swing, and so, and I'm looking around.
I want to go to that point,
Yeah,
because I think, you know, I hear this a lot, especially in the program. I know a lot of people will probably listen to this that are in the program, coming into the program. I mean, you were 4 years sober at this point. I mean, you were doing the do, as they say, in meetings, in recovery. And then this event happens. Do you think it was just the event, or were there things that led up to making that decision to not tell the doctor? Because I personally, my experience when I relapsed before was, it wasn't that I just stopped going. I slowly stopped a lot of little things.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden I ended up relapsing, wondering how I got there. But it was like, it was a slow. And how did that happen for you? Was it just the moment of not saying it, or was there a fade?
No, it was definitely a process. Like when I first, and it was pride too, because I was so engaged in the program and people thought, oh, you know, Portia's a success story. And so I didn't want to come back in and be like, I relapsed. So I danced around that. You know, I'd go back to meetings, but I wasn't totally honest about my relapse. And then also, I think I got way too busy. I wasn't serving. I was showing up occasionally to meetings, but I wasn't working my steps. I just got so busy. Like I forgot what had to come first. And it's not even that it's that hard. Like now, every morning I get up, I pray, I read something positive. At the end of the day, I do an inventory to make sure that, you know, my character's in line. And I wasn't doing those things. And, you know, and the hardest part about my relapse was that I totally knew. I mean, I remember even talking to my lawyer once I got involved with that, and my lawyer's like, well, what do you want to do? We could probably go to trial. And I said, you don't understand. Like when I'm sober, I'm a totally different person. I don't have a chance unless I get sober. And he's like, well, get sober. I'm like, I can't, you know. It was like, and the worst part is I know my best self is not somebody using, but I couldn't quit. I was just so caught up, and it sucked. It really did.
And I think what happens, you know, and I could relate to that. It's like when you get sober, and of course, when we're in our addiction, nothing's going right. We can't hold a job. We can't see our kids. We're not the best version of ourselves. So we have a low self-esteem. And I think that's what helps us kind of enter into the rooms of the humbleness and like, I need help. You know, I remember first going in saying, I don't know how to do this. I've tried. I'm at my bottom. I've been to prison twice already. Like if I go back, I'm going to go back out. And then we get sober, and then things start happening in our lives, and we start thinking the whole, I got it, you know, and it's like, I think I'm doing better. And recovery became first. Even for me, my first year, it was like all in recovery.
Yeah.
My second year, it was almost like all in life, because recovery got me the job and the family. And then all of a sudden I put recovery on the back end. Now I was grateful that people were in my life. My wife's in recovery, come back in. But I find that a trend in recovery, you know, where people start getting things back and then they forget to keep the recovery first.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It scares me. I just, at my meeting last night, I said, I have a medical procedure coming up. And the first thing I told them was, I'm an addict. I can have no narcotics, so we're coming up with a different plan. I ripped my hamstring right off the bone this last year. Like, it was a major injury. And when the paramedics showed up, they're like, they went to give me drugs. I was actually working at a treatment center, and I said, I can't have any drugs. And the guy goes, you gotta have something. We can't move you. We can't anything. And the girls, they came around, they said, don't give her fentanyl. Just don't give her fentanyl. She's sober. It's a big deal to her.
That's the girls in your treatment center for you.
Yeah. I worked at a treatment center for 2 years. I'm just changing that right now. But it was good because, again, it kept me in my recovery. It's why I did it 2 days a week, to stay in the trenches, to be reminded of where I've been, and to give back. And I just think you have to be so mindful of, like, for me now, I look at it and say, it's that best version of yourself is so worth fighting for. Like, I have too much to accomplish in life. Like, initially my sobriety came from suffering. It was like, I don't want to suffer anymore. I'm tired. I need to get clean. Now it's like, my life's too good to lose, and that's what happens in time with recovery. The pain is what gets you in there, but then life gets beautiful. And I don't want to give that up. I've done it before, it's just. And
I've heard the conversation. I'd like to hear your perspective on, is it, I've heard people say it's harder to stay sober than it is to get sober. And it's kind of like it's a topic I've heard in a couple of things. And I'm like, well, I think both of them are, obviously they're both tough, but when I look at staying sober, it's almost like the fear of, and I agree, I love what you said, the fear of losing everything that I have now, and knowing that there's only one thing. You're spiritual as well. So, I know if I lose my spirituality and I lose my recovery, I can lose all of this stuff, the business, the family, and everything. But it's, I look back at, going into the rooms and the humbleness, I think both are tough. I don't know what your perspective on that would be.
I'm 50 years old and I'm tired of climbing out of holes. Like, I am, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
I'm tired. That's what I say in meetings. I'm like, I do not have energy. It was a hard climb for me when I got locked up, and I finally hit like what I think is the deepest hole of my life. Like, I destroyed everything around me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have some climbing to do. And it took a good 4.5 years while I was in prison of turning things around. And I'm like, I don't have that energy anymore. I'm just not climbing back out of those holes anymore.
Right.
Well,
let's go there. So you were sober 4.5 years, you got involved in the real estate heavy, and your addiction was, you're full force now. Yeah,
my addiction was full force. And so again, that grandiosity, just poor decisions. And it started out just flipping lots, which isn't illegal. And I remember some guys showing me how to do these equity deals and thinking, there is no way I would do that. That doesn't make any sense. It wasn't really that I thought they were illegal, because everyone was kind of doing them, but you just knew, like, you just got this icky feeling about it. It was just borrowing a bunch of money and that you really couldn't pay back. Like, it's kind of like robbing the bank, only the.
Now, this was back in the real estate when it crashed, right?
Yeah. It was right back before the crash. And there's a really good TED Talk. It's called Robbing a Bank from the Inside. And it describes so well how, like, everybody was in collusion. The banks, the mortgage brokers, people like me, I was in the mix where I was putting these deals together. But I knew, everybody knew, like, you can't tell me you don't know, your inside tells you, but you just power past it. I did. And when I got desperate and I was juggling way too many things, my judgment was poor, I just started doing these equity deals where I would get an appraisal that was higher than what the home was worth, and then send it over to, I had investors that wanted to buy these homes and pull as much cash out of them as they could. And the banks were happy to lend as much cash as anyone wanted, even if the house wasn't worth it. So there's just everybody involved. And then when the crash happens, it's like, well, I got investigated and indicted, and we probably all should have, but it's okay. Like, that was my excuse for a long time. When I first got in prison, I'm like, everyone else was dirty too. Why'd they come for me? Well, that's not the point. I was dirty. I did these things, and I had to get to that place where I totally owned my role, because my integrity was what was lacking, and I wanted to rebuild that. So, yeah.
And you still had that mindset. And that's what I always say. It's amazing. I look at, I've lost a lot of friends in recovery. I got friends who are still out there. And people will look at them and say they're just a terrible person, you know, and I'm looking at it like, I don't know. It's not that they're a terrible person, because you take me on drugs, and yes, you're right. The drugs are making me a bad person, but
Right.
even in your soul and your spirit, you're like,
Yeah.
I have to have this integrity. I have this, but it's almost like, I used to say that when I was on drugs, it was like a black shade would cover my heart. And that's what would happen. And slowly, you know, God would try to lift that shade up, but then I would take more drugs and just continue to cover that heart. And that's why I felt like I had no heart, but it was still there, you know,
Yeah.
it was still
Well,
there.
and I think for me, because I had recovery and because I had a good life, I was terrified. I knew I was in it deep. Like, I'm using drugs and I'm doing these real estate deals. It was the worst feeling of my life. You know, I'll have people say, oh, well, you were living large for a while. That must have felt really good. And I'm like, I cannot even describe the hell that I felt. Like the fear, the weight, the just knowing that it's a house of cards. And it was actually a relief for me. It was very painful to go to prison, but it was like, it's over. It's over, you know? And yeah, it was just awful. Like, compared to what, I mean, I don't have the kind of money I used to have, not even close, but I am so much more at peace. I'm so much happier than I ever was in any of those moments.
Yeah.
So.
I remember when I first got arrested, my mom, it was the second time, and she was out there. She was scared because I was out ripping and running again. And I remember she said, there's a part of me that's sad, but there's a part of me that I can sleep at night right now, knowing you're safe, you know, and even our family members, you know, just saying like, you're in jail, and I'm not that I'm happy, but like, at least I know you're safe. You know, you're alive.
Isn't that's the craziest thing. Like, I had a friend recently that her brother got locked up, and she, you know, they were just so upset about it. And I said, oh, I'm so glad. Like, you know, now I know where he is. He's right where he's in the safest place he could be. She's like, well, yeah, but he's suicidal. He's so depressed. I'm like, good, that he's in the right place.
He's in the right place.
Yeah, he's being watched. You're okay. You know, and yeah, it's hard.
It's hard. And I look back, and it's one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. And people wonder, you know, like, how could you say going to prison was the greatest thing that happened to you? And my wife laughs at me all the time, because I do this on purpose to remind myself. But she bought these pillows the other day, and she's like, do you like this pillow? You think it's good? Like, you seem like you don't care about. I says, babe, in prison, I used to have this. And I go to her and tell her, like, it's a pillow that I'd have to stuff and try to take another person. And it was like, not even a pillow. So this pillow right now is the greatest pillow I've ever had. And it's a reminder, you know.
It's so true. Like, with the whole pandemic thing, you know, everybody's on quarantine and my neighbors are all trying to get food. I said, I can survive for a long time on beans and tortillas. I'm fine.
It gives you that perspective.
Yeah, my life is simple and I don't need a lot. And I found, you know, I'm grateful for the things that I have. And I learned that I could live just fine with very little. So many beautiful things happened for me in prison. And that is really why I wanted to write a book about it, because I think the world sees it as such a bad thing, you know? And I'm like, it's not. I mean, it doesn't have to be. It just doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So.
And you did such a great job. I mean, the stories you tell and how you tell it of the things you learned in prison, and Too Tall, and the relationships you had. And so take us to the real, like, we'll transition quickly to, I mean, because of how you got into prison. Because again, some people don't, I know your story, so I don't want to be ignorant to people who don't, of how you got into prison and your experience in prison.
Yeah. So, I mean, eventually I was under investigation for quite a while. And eventually, I mean, the FBI showed up, which nobody wants to experience. It's all bad when that happens. You're living in your house with your kids and your husband. And I mean, even though there's that impending doom feeling of being under investigation, when they show up, it gets super real at that point. And I remember thinking I would give up everything. Please just go away. Just take everything I have, but let me have my family. You know, it's just the worst feeling. I think too, I was so terrified of detoxing that I made the worst decisions. Like, I could have made a deal early on, but I didn't, because I was scared to detox. I was scared of everything. I was just scared of everything. But I ended up, they ended up putting me in for a mental evaluation about 3 weeks prior to I was going to go to trial, which would have been like a good 20-year sentence for me. I mean, I just really was so like not thinking straight, you know.
Oblivious.
Or fortunately, I guess they locked me up for this mental evaluation, and I detoxed in the worst possible way anyone ever could, like near-death experience. It was just the most painful experience. Lost myself completely mentally. By the end of that lasted 2 or 3 months. I pled guilty, and that is by the grace of God. I really wasn't mentally in the right state of mind to do it, but I did it, and I'm grateful that it happened.
Yeah.
And so then I had about 6 months until I walked in to get sentenced. And that day changed my life forever. I mean, I start the book out with the sentence because it really was like, even my kids still are like, I can't drive by the courthouse. It just was life before and life after the federal courthouse is the way we view life.
Yeah.
Because there's no way to deny it. You know what I mean? You walk in there and it's like, it just gets so real so fast. And when I sat down and I knew, I could feel before he told me he was going to give me the maximum sentence. And I remember feeling so sad, and the kind of loneliness and sadness that I will never feel again in this life. Just, what have I done? I turned around and looked at my family and realized what I had done. Just, that was the moment. And when they walked in, I remember, I wrote about it, but I just remember thinking how strange it was. I was almost like an observer, out of body experience,
Yeah.
The United States versus Portia Louder. And you're like, the United States versus me? Like, what have I done? That's a big place versus little me. And I apologized. They went back and forth, and eventually he just gave me that 7-year sentence. And
there's something to be said about what you were just talking about, of like, some people might be listening to this and be like, how did you just realize what you've done? And I remember, and it's funny because as you talk, I went through it. So I'm getting goosebumps, and I'm thinking about like remembering sitting there and signing in Florida. They give you a blue paper. They call it the blue paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking like, it just got real.
Yeah.
And wondering, and people were like, how did you just realize what you did when you were out stealing, sleeping in your car? And I'm like, because you're so lost in your own world.
Right.
You're oblivious to what everybody, and I remember my mom would tell me, do you realize what you're doing? And I literally thought I was doing good because I had a car to sleep in. Like, I have a car to sleep in, and I got a job. There's guys sleeping in a garbage.
Right.
I was looking at somebody doing worse than me so I could feel better,
I love your perspective because I so get it,
Yeah.
It's just so true. And you do a good job of describing something that we all experienced, but I hadn't thought of it that way. So yeah,
You just think, and it hit you. And finally in the courthouse, it's hitting you now.
Yeah, it hit me. It just got real. It's like you say, up to that point, to survive, you have to keep telling yourself why things are okay. Like, well, we still have a home, or we're still this, we're going to recover. You're always working to try to hustle to keep things kind of in the air. And then all of a sudden it just boom, like,
Yeah. And that's the hardest thing to tell people. That I talk to a lot of people in recovery, and I bet you do too, especially the ones that are the hardest to help are the family members who come to me and say, my sister, my son, he's on drugs. What do? I want to help him. And the first question I ask is, are they looking for help? And they're like, well, no, every time they get mad. And I don't know, I'm trying to get them to see it,
Yeah.
And the hardest thing to tell somebody then is, you can't get them to see it until they see it. And
the problem is, the more you help them, the less they're going to see it. You've got to just let them hit whatever bottom they're going to hit. But nobody wants to do that. It's too painful,
And that's the hard part, for family members to my mom was talking about it yesterday, about having to deal with that, forcing to try to get them to see what you see. And even now, like, it's funny because I have kids of my own, and I have 3 stepchildren. I call my children, and 2 daughters that are, 2 and 1. And I'm constantly trying to get them to see, and it almost like hits me. I'm like, that's like somebody, when I was in my addiction, are trying to force me to see something that I don't want to see. I got to let them go through it,
Yeah, it has changed my whole perspective, recovery, because I try to work those principles too as a parent, but it's tricky. Like, it's the hardest part. I have a brother that's like on the street right now, and it's so hard. It's just hard when it's family, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I refuse to enable him though, because I'm just like, it's not even helping him.
Right. Because
But, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I pray for him every night, and I believe in him, and I know that when he gets into enough pain, there's a chance for him. He just has to suffer enough.
And I think that's the best advice to give to people who are dealing with somebody who's going through an addiction, is all you can do, which is hard, is to love them, to let them know, I'm here for you. If you need me, I'm there for you. Because if you're going to be that person telling them that they need to change, if they want to change, they may not want to call you because their pride is so high,
right,
that they don't want to call you to say, hey, I need help now, because they feel like you're going to say, I told you,
Right.
loving them is the best advice,
Yeah, for
So
sure.
take us. So now you're in the courthouse.
So yeah,
They
I'm in the
sentence you.
courtroom. I look back and I see my family and I realize what I've done. And that was, I mean, the judge wasn't happy. He was kind of ticked off. And so not only, I'm white collar, so typically you get like 8 weeks at least to self-surrender, but he was like, just chain her and shackle her up and let's get her out of here. And that would have been pretty bad with my kids sitting there. I didn't want that, and my husband actually stood up and my husband just cried for about 10 minutes. And the judge was like, we're willing to listen to what Mr. Louder has to say, which was pretty cool. That doesn't usually happen. And my husband just really just said, please give her this time. Please give us this time to say goodbye. And that was a special moment for me. It was the moment that I realized that even though it was going to be really hard, we were going to get through it together. Like we had something bigger than anything that could divide us, which was a love that was very true and real for us. And it carried us through. It wasn't easy, but it carried us through. And our relationship is honestly better. Like we're so happy, because we did it together. But so, yeah, I had 8 weeks at that point. The judge did agree and we went home and truly my life changed that day. Like I didn't see the world the same from that point on. Everything that I thought was important, all the money and the things I was working for, I was like, are you kidding me? None of this matters. The only thing that mattered was time and simple experiences with my kids, just cherishing every moment. And it was so heartbreaking to leave them. It was so heartbreaking. And
that part put me in tears. I read when I read it. Oh my gosh.
That was
about that.
I can't even read it without crying because I lived it. It was so hard. It was so hard. Even when I did the audio version of the book and I'm like trying to get through it, the guy that was helping me, he's like, just be authentic. And I'm like, I won't even be able to talk. Like it was so hard to go through, something you never want to have to do. But I built a new life on that pain. I mean, truthfully, that pain is my foundation for a new life. So it's like when people, I think a lot of people want to try to avoid the pain, or they'll tell you how sad they are for you. And I'm like, don't feel sorry for me, man. I built something beautiful because of what I went through. And everyone can do that. Let them suffer. I mean, it hurts, but you have something to build on with that. So
I love what you just said, that you built a foundation on that pain. It's like, it's the one thing you remember, and it's the one thing that holds you up, and it's the one thing that pushes you through. Like the hardest thing for mine was when I called my mom, because she knew when I was on drugs. And I've been to prison already. They've experienced this already. They've experienced the courtrooms, and they're upper class. They've never been through this. And I remember she'd always say, just don't go back to jail, please. I don't want that phone call.
Right.
So when I had to make that phone call, and hearing her cry, it's the one thing I'll never forget. But that's the pain that when I look at my mom now and she needs something, when I look at my kids, when I'm having a tough day, I'm like, I never want to go through that. Let me do the hard things and things I don't want to do. Yep.
That's the thing that I think we all try to prevent people from suffering, but that suffering will allow you to build something new. You never want to feel it again. So, but when I walked into prison, it was because I didn't grow up going in and out of jail. I'd never been in prison or anything like that. And people ask, were you scared? And I'm like, I was suffering so deeply. Because I just left my family. Fear was not in there. Like when the pain is that great, you're just like, the heck with it, What are you going to do? Like beat me up? I don't care. Like there's not any, you know what I mean?
Life was terrible. This is, I'm here now.
Like, how's it going to get any worse? It was just the most agonizing thing. I couldn't quit crying. I just felt this deep sense of pain, disconnection. I'd look around and I thought, I can't do this. It's 7 years. Everyone's wearing khaki. There's about 1,000 women. I walked into Dublin, California, which is near Oakland. There's a lot of unhappy people, in my opinion. Nobody's smiling at me,
Right.
Just like everybody's just dreary and it's this, what it is? It's the same thing day after day after day after day. And within 3 or 4 days, like I remember there was a woman at 5 a.m. that pounded on my door in A&O, which is, when you first get in there, they put you in orientation, and she's like, get up, you need to come out and mop the floor. Like anyone in orientation has to come out and help clean. And I'm just like, I can't even get off the floor, It was just so awful. So, but there were some kindnesses. I mean, the women were kind to me. First I had Bubbles when I would sit at the table and sob, and Bubbles would just she was so good at watching TV. Like that woman could watch TV for like 12 hours straight. You know what I mean?
Yep, there's those people.
They got that down.
Yeah,
She'd just keep watching, and she'd look over and say, "You're gonna be okay, baby. Just keep breathing. It'll pass." And then she'd look at the TV again. She didn't know me.
Right.
just keep breathing. You got this, baby. It goes away. Like she knew what I'd been through, and she's just like, "You're gonna survive." Which at that point in time, I wondered, am I ever gonna get through this pain?
Right.
And then I did go over and have a talk with myself on the track. I probably looked like I was a little bit out of it because I was honestly speaking out loud to myself. I felt like it was in not a good place. Like, I've got to get it together and do something with this time. And I just walked around the track and just told myself, you have a beautiful life to fight for. This is important. You need to make the best of this time. You need to quit feeling sorry for yourself. It's not helping you. You have a family at home that depends on you. And I don't know if you remember the part in the book, but I remember clearly at that point, I grabbed onto something that a therapist had said to me before I came. And he just said, you're right, Portia, it would be really hard to go to prison for 7 years. But what would be worse is if you stayed home in your addiction for 7 years, because in that you wouldn't be able to become an amazing person in your addiction, but in prison, you would be able to become an amazing person. And I thought, I'm going to do this. I have an option.
Yeah. I think I remember when I read that, I was thinking, I remember getting that perspective, but not at the time you did, which is amazing to get that perspective at that time that like, hey, you're actually lucky because you would have stayed home for 7 more years. And it hit me personally when I have a lot of friends that, you probably know, people know when you were out there ripping and running on drugs, you had those people you hung out with. And I had these group of guys and all 3 of them overdosed. One in October last year, one in December right after, and then one a couple of years ago. And I just remember thinking at that moment, like, that could have been me.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely could have been me. So it's awesome that God allowed you to see that in that moment, to take that time right there.
Yeah. And it was such a journey for me. Like, I wish I could say that right then I just knew, but it took me still 2 years to like totally own my choices and where I had been. But it was such a change because I realized I had some power in the situation I was in. Like, I have the ability to use this time to become an amazing person. Like it gave me something to hold on to. Before that, I just felt like a victim of these 1,000 women, this sea of women in khaki, and then the relationships that I built with people like Tutal and people that were just kind to me and took me in. I started, I became, it became where I lived. They became my people. And I developed so much love for the women that I met and their stories. I started learning, like, to me still, that's the coolest part. Like, I learned so much from these women, all this wisdom. And I was fortunate because I was blogging and I was writing home, and I didn't know I was going to write a book, but I captured a lot of these experiences through writing. And then when I got home, I just felt compelled to write a book. Like, it wasn't really a big plan on my, but yeah, the journey was, my first year I spent it in California, and I was still on fire. I mean, I was still pissed off at the government. I still thought they did me dirty and I was going to show them, and and eventually I got myself shipped to Minnesota. And so I got to experience the whole Con Air, shackled, chained. It was, I was like, what the heck? I am not, like, I'm black boxed and there's guys with big shotguns looking at me. I'm like, what? What is happening?
It's a different world.
Yeah, it's a totally different world. And then when I got to Minnesota, I'm so grateful. I love that place. It's crazy to me, but that's sacred ground for me because I spent so much time outside, so much time, just my heart and soul were in a lot of pain. Sometimes I would cry all day long. I'd just sit out under that tree and I would cry, and girls would try to walk up to me and I'd be like, keep your distance. Like, I can't even talk right now, But I remember calling my husband through that time and I said, I don't know what I'm going through, but I feel like I'm detoxing all the emotional pain that I felt for years.
Yeah.
Like, and I would have conversations with my kids and with God and just, please forgive me, and I really did a lot. It was very introspective for me to be able to look at what I'd done. And that is when I realized how serious my situation was. It was like, financially, I've kind of destroyed us here. I have my own, just everything. It was just extremely painful, but also such a purifying experience to really own what I had done.
Yeah.
And
You probably never faced, and I think whether people are in their addiction or they're not in their addiction, we were talking to, I talked to a group of young men, and when you're dealing with everyday life, sometimes you just get caught up. Like for us, it was in our drugs and addiction, right?
Right.
But, I talk to family members, and you probably do this too. It's so funny. I'm like, I wish you guys would work the 12 steps and look at the resentments you're having in your life and all this stuff that's actually stopping you. And a lot of times we don't deal with what's going on.
Right.
We don't deal with the problems that we're facing in our life. We just kind of push them aside and keep moving forward. Yeah. And you were put in a situation where you're like, I have nothing but time.
Yeah.
And then you also have your, and I was thinking about how you're talking about, like, you were getting angry at the government. I'm probably thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, but was there probably people around you in those moments? Because in prison, there's a lot of, everybody's pissed off at the world.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that was the thing that for me, I was a little bit confused because I wanted, I had this goal to become an amazing person. And that drove me. I wrote lists of things that I thought were important for me to do. But I'm also working in education with white collar criminals and white collar people, my friends actually.
Yeah, right.
But there was and a lot of them are very smart, doctors and lawyers, and they're super smart, but all of them see themselves as a victim. Like all of them are saying, yeah, the government did this. They're dirty. They're dirty. They're dirty. And it was so easy for me to look at all the things the government did wrong. That's what we spend our days doing. And then I started, I was serving women that were I was in reentry. And so these women would come down that were getting ready to leave. And some of them were in for drug charges or whatever else, but they seemed to have a better handle on their responsibility. Like they weren't, poor me, I'm a victim. They're like, yeah, I got hit for dealing drugs. That's what happens when you're a drug dealer. And right. I'm like, why is it that they can own their stuff, but we can't? Yeah. And I could see that it was holding me back, and I talk about it in the book when I saw this woman get up that was so powerful in her ability to really own her life. She was at the lowest of the low, and she got up and read a whole list of everything she'd done wrong. And it was hardcore stuff. Mm-hmm. She lost her kid. She put it all on the table. And when they asked her why she did it, she said, because I've tried everything but being honest. And now I'm going to try to be honest or I'm going to die. It's my last shot, Right. And I thought, I'm doing that. Like that girl hasn't figured out there's something in the room that she has that we don't, Right. So I started learning from these women, and and I loved my friends that I worked with in education, but I'm like, love you, but I'm not going to sit around anymore and talk about poor me. It's not empowering. I need find freedom. And that always comes through owning your part, So.
And it's cool that, like, I'm thinking about even now in everyday life. I look at my time in prison and serving in 3 different prisons. I look at the ones where I put myself around the cool people who were fun and this, but they were so negative, and I didn't want to let them go because, we had such a bond, but man, they were just so negative and always talked about how when we get out, we can't get a job, and how my mindset, poor me, the victim. Mm-hmm. And I'm such a big advocate. I'm always talking about that, of not being the victim and only control what you can control, but it's only because I've been the victim.
For sure.
I've played that card. I was just talking to, and I'll just say a family member, because she'll probably listen to this, and continuously talking about what this person's doing and what that person's doing. But they did this and they did that, and they're doing this to me. And I'm like, I know, but you can't control them.
Right.
And all they'll tell you is, it's easy for you to say. I says, the only reason it's easy for me to say is because I've been there,
Right.
And there's freedom. There's freedom in knowing that I'm in control. I can control the people around me. It's up to me. It's not up to you.
Right.
And I think it does take a little bit of turning your pride aside, practice.
Right. It takes some humility. I got to the point in prison where I was like, there is nothing anyone can do to me. Like whatever, you could come in and just say, Louder, no, we're going to take all your stuff. And I'd be like, I still get to decide how I respond to that. I still get to decide. I'm like, I remember an officer telling me, Louder, I didn't shake down your I have so much respect for you. I didn't shake down your locker. I'm like, oh, go ahead. You can do whatever you need to. I feel pretty good about where my locker's at. If you need to shake it down. I knew like
Yeah.
I can control me. I get to control what I do, my thoughts, the way I treat others. Even like it comes down to, I want to have love and compassion for others. Even if I don't say anything bad, they can feel it if I don't. And I just could tell that when I have good feelings for people, my life is going so much better. And so if I started having judgments, I would pray to change me, like not them, if they're acting amok. However, I will say, I don't know about you, but there were 3 women in prison, always 3, but that just don't care. Like they don't care, and they don't care, and they let you all know it. Like, I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't care if they take my good time. I don't care if I spend all my time in the shoe. I just don't care. And I remember thinking, geez, you'd walk in to do an interview or with your family or anything, and they'd be in the back screaming, and it didn't matter if you were like, hey, could you keep it down? They're going to be like, screw you, I don't care. And
Yeah.
all 3 of those women have died since they got out, and I'm like, it sucks. It sucks to see people like they feel like that's freedom. That isn't freedom. Freedom is when you really learn how to care and not try to control anyone else and recognize your powers from within. It really is. So,
And that's it's funny how you talk to people and whether it's the world or it's like the opposite. They think I gotta get me. I gotta look out for me against everybody, because that's how I'll find my happiness. You won't help me get it.
yeah.
I'm not going to help you. Why would I do that for you? I got to look out for me.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so backwards, it's so like, yeah, I'm grateful that I have my spirituality. I'm a Christian. So I talk to these young men. I talk about how the Bible teaches the exact opposite of what the world teaches. How it tells me I'm supposed to be a husband is the exact opposite of what the world would tell me. They'd say, you're the man of the house, put your foot down,
Yeah.
But we have these views that think, and the selfish and self-centeredness. Now we're in recovery, so our life depends on not being selfish and self-centeredness, which I'm grateful for.
Me too. I honestly wonder if I would not have had my addiction, and I would not, if I would not have reached the level of suffering that I did, would I ever have learned these principles that bring me so much joy? I mean, I feel like my soul has opened up. I am not jealous of other people. I truly want everyone to succeed, and it's through these principles and these steps that I've worked that have made me see people and cheer them on. And I can see somebody in the worst possible, like I had a woman call me not too long ago that relapsed, and she's like, Portia, I just feel like I failed on such a level. And I said, you're just in the middle. You need to get back up. You're not done yet. That's all, I can truly have compassion. I can believe in somebody because I know if I can do it, you can do it. I've been to the bottom. There's a way out, and these principles will do it for you, and I would never trade that, but it was so painful.
Yeah. Oh, it was. Yeah. When you're looking back at it, it was, but thinking about the fact that like, if I have a resentment, like I'm frustrated, I'm like, gosh, I got to do this 4-step where I got to write down why I'm at. And like, even in the moment, I'm like, my pride is like, I don't want to do this, but I know I have to, because, and it's like a practice principle that helped me to understand that, to not hold that anger inside. So let's talk a little bit about getting out. So how long have you been sober now?
7 years.
So 7 years sober. Congratulations. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about like getting out, the process of, there's a lot to learn. And I think, people should definitely it's funny because I texted you, and I want people to hear this because it's funny. I was like, man, you make me want to write a book about my life, because the way you write it about your life is it's so good. It's so like, and I'm not even just like trying to promote Portia, but like you have to read this book, because the way you write it, it's like watching a movie. I love reading books and reading. I have read a lot of people's stories, and I'm honestly got to tell you that this is the best one I've ever read.
Oh, thanks. Oh, I'm super honored.
You do a great job at making me feel like I'm there. So if you want to hear more about the in-prison stories, definitely can get into the book. But now getting out and what you're doing now, because I think it's amazing of what you're doing now. I've been following you. I've been watching you. Don't take that the weird way, but on what you're doing in the communities for recovery, I think it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I was kind of scared to get out, honestly. Like I felt excited about my future, but at the same time leaving, I had so much love for the women that were there. And I also had found myself there. Like I found a peace and a simplicity in life and a joy that I appreciated. And I knew, the only thing that I knew about my life before was that it was very hectic. I had spent years using drugs. So it was hard for me to picture what my life could look like coming out of prison. And I remember my prayer every night was, don't let me forget where I've been, please. Don't let me forget where I've been. I want to take these experiences with me, because a lot of people in prison just don't look back. You know, it's like, it's a pretty traumatic experience. So they get out and they just don't look back, and they hit the ground running. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. So, you know, I got out. I started out with a job. I tried to get a job at a homeless shelter, but they wouldn't let me do it and said I had to make more money or whatever. So I went and worked as a photographer for a while. And then when I got out of BOP custody, I was able to get a job at a treatment center. And while I was working nights at the treatment center, I actually wrote the book. You know, I mean, I was working a couple days a week, and I'd work a swing grave shift, and the swing, I'd be able to go in and facilitate meetings. And then when they would all go down for the night, I would sit in there and I would outline, you know, I made an outline first and then pulled content together and just started writing it. And they were my readers, and I would send them into prison, you know, a chapter at a time, and say, tell me what you think to all my friends that were locked up. They're like, it's great. We love it.
Yeah.
So I knew I was in good shape, because you know how you read when you're in prison. Everybody reads.
Yeah. Everybody reads, and they'll dissect it, and they might
pass
it around to a bunch
they passed
of
it around, outline it, call me back and tell me what I needed to change.
Right.
So yeah, they were my readers. But and it was a little overwhelming. Like when I think about my life now, I'm like, I remember thinking, how am I going to write a book? Like, I don't have any writing background. I mean, it just seemed overwhelming. But once I broke it down into small pieces, and I would just do like 2 or 3 chapters a week, and they were small chapters, and I'm like, and then I go back and clean them up. And then I found an editor. I had 2 or 3 editors review it, and looked at, you know, traditional publishing versus self-publishing. And I learned a lot. So when you're ready to write that book, we got to get together, because I learned a lot, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I would love to be like, collaborate and write one about men's prisons and just the whole journey. So we should talk, but
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I published it. And then, you know, what's been cool is I really haven't done anything to promote my experience, but I've had a lot of people just reach out and say, and I almost never say no, like, you know, hey, will you come talk to this group or this group? I don't make money doing it, but I'm fortunate because we don't need a lot of money, and it's not my highest priority. And then my husband provides for the most part. You know, I have to have a job, so I work a few days a week, but it works out. So, I mean, someday maybe I'll make some money, who knows? But at this point, I have a lot of joy, and I spend my time doing what I want to do. And I've got, you know, speaking engagements lined up, and I might write another book, and just, yeah, I serve where I can. Our lives are probably not that much different when it comes to recovery. I stay engaged in recovery, do whatever I can to serve. And I have so much passion for people in prison, and really sharing the humanity of that experience, because the world doesn't hear that part. They see that, you know, the bars and the wildness on TV. When I see, like, I remember this was so strange to me. I remember seeing this, there was a TV show, and it was a great big room, and these guys were triple decked. They were guys, they were all men, and they had teeny little spaces, and they're on those little cookie sheet, you know, bunks, and they each have like a towel and a few other things. And the way that the people are narrating it is, you know, this is just a really big, bad group of guys, and they're wild, and they can get drugs around and all that. And I'm looking at them going, those boys, do you have any idea how hard it is to live in those circumstances? Right. Those guys have got each other's back. You know, when someone has a family member struggling, they all put together to help that person out. Like, this is humanity at its finest. These people are really helping each other through it. I just don't see it the same way. I'm like, what you see on TV is a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
There's so
people
much.
Will say, like, the world will say, those are criminals. They deserve that. And like,
they're people.
They're people, and it's amazing. So like, when I got out, again, I come from a Middle Eastern culture where my family struggled with me talking about me going to prison because of the perception that it had on people.
Right.
And I was trying to change that. So I remember, like, it was being a battle talking to my family, because obviously I want to make them happy. And I was like, I don't want you guys to be upset about this. And it's amazing, because I would tell them, and my mom would come visit, and my dad never understood it, but she would meet some of the guys that I met and say, oh, this guy was a really nice guy, and then make friends with the mom. And then, you know, there was a good friend of mine that, like, he was like a mentor to me, and my mom was friends with his wife because they were older. And it's like, my mom started making friends with, and my dad would be like, what are you doing making friends with them? You know? And they think people. Like, they're and so many, I know when I was in prison, I mean, I would almost say, and I'll be kind of safe on the percentage. I would say 65% of the men that I met were addicts that were not bad people. They were just drug addicts.
Right.
I mean, I still write 2 of them right now in prison, send them money on their iPads. And if they got out today and they wanted a place to stay, I'd give them a place to stay. Like to the point that I know how good of men these guys are.
Yeah, for real.
They fell under these circumstances of addiction, and that's
Macy's my best friend, and she's still locked up. Like, we are besties. I write her, oh, tell your friends, all your boys that are in prison still, that they can download my book now if they have a
so awesome
tablet. Yeah, I'm so excited, for free. They can read it. So anyway,
I saw you did that with Travis. I think it was Travis Ritchie, right?
Right.
That's
super excited
awesome
about that. So yeah, but yeah, no, I did not find. I would say when people ask me like, how many people do you think are just like bad people that couldn't recover? Like, I didn't think it was. I thought it was like 10%, and everybody else is like, what? I said, no, there's a lot of really good people in prison that come from hard circumstances. A lot of times their parents are addicts. They've grown up in the worst conditions and they're trying to do better, and they just don't have the skills or I remember Macy telling me, I just want to learn how to live life normal. I mean, she'd had the hardest life, and so I wanted to share that. I'm like, it's not what you think. And like you say, if people get into recovery, if there's like legit recovery, they're amazing people. So.
Yeah. And there's so much. And that's why I think it's amazing what you're doing. And I'm coming up in May. So like, cause I was on probation when I got out. So they, after 2 years in Florida, you have to be 2 years off of.
Me too. In June, I'll be off probation. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So they're finally letting us go back into the prison and do stuff because of COVID. So I've talked to Travis about doing some podcast stuff, and that's the stuff. It's funny. You talked about like not making money doing it. Yeah. And I remember the true joy of actually helping people. I knew I wanted to, I have this fence company that's doing great. It's doing amazing. My family's blessed with it. And I was like, what do I want to do now? The one thing I love is helping people. And I think like sometimes grandiose. I'm like, well, I'm gonna help people all around the world, So I started into thinking of what I learned in business. And I was like, I can help people in business. And I thought about getting into business coaching. And I remember I got into it, and I remember the first time I was like, I don't know if I like making money doing this.
Right.
So then I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start doing things that I love, which is I love hearing stories. I love the podcast stuff and sharing stuff and sharing my story and other people's. And I'm like, and I'm going to see where that takes me. And the joy that I've had the past 4 months, cool. I've had more fun doing this stuff than I've had making 6 figures in my business,
Yeah, it's so cool. I love it.
Yeah. And that's what I think people, and that's kind of what I'd like people to understand. It's like, everybody has a story. Yeah. Everybody's been through something. And sometimes we're ashamed. I know I dealt with it personally. The first 6 months of getting out, I was almost ashamed to start talking about I would have to hide and be like, I wouldn't say I'm going to an AA meeting. I'm like, oh, I'm just going with my friends, because I was ashamed. I would hide behind it. I thought you would judge me. And then I finally accepted who I was as a person. And I knew if you judge me, it's not it's not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of you.
Right.
And that's where the freedom came. And you talked a lot about that stuff in your book, and you continue to share that. So, yeah, I mean, this has been, I would love to talk to you for like another hour. I think we're going to continue to talk because we're on the same mission.
Yeah. But I'm excited. I met some really cool people. Travis has been great to, definitely. I hope I get to meet you. I hope you'll come out and we get, or I'll go out there or whatever, because it's just, there's a group of people that can change. Like, I have a lot of friends that are working in criminal justice reform, right? That are trying to change things. And I'm always happy to go to the Capitol and do whatever I can to make a difference. But what my passion is to connect people to the humanity. I feel like if people know the human side of people that are incarcerated, everything will change. I really do. I feel like that's where the change takes place, through compassion and understanding, to change that whole stigma about being incarcerated, and the people that are there, and bring out the human side of that. Just like you're doing, just like I'm doing, as people that have been incarcerated or people that are in recovery. By living our best life, we have the ability to say, hey, there's, people can change. Like, there's a real chance for people to change if we love them and believe in them. And I think that's my mission. So
Yeah.
I love it.
And you're doing it. That's what's awesome about it, is you're doing it. So, I mean, you've brought so much value to us. Obviously, I mean, obviously the book and I mean, this is gonna be on video. So you got some people might see it, but it's called Living Louder, A Compassionate Journey Through Federal Prison, Portia Louder. Honestly, you got to get this book. It's so good to read. But how can we provide value to you as speaking engagements? I mean, you've helped us obviously here. So how can we bring value to you?
You know what? Just keep being amazing people. I really think, like, as we change the world when we see the best in others. And so, but definitely you and I are going to stay in touch, because there's too many cool things to do. And I know you're friends with Travis too. And there's just a group of people that have been incarcerated, that are determined to do whatever we can to help our brothers and sisters that are still in there to change. I really think that the change isn't going to come from the system. It's going to come from within each individual, and it's going to come from us seeing their potential. I feel like that's where the change is. You know, when we recognize the beauty of the people that are incarcerated and what they can accomplish, and when they see that in themselves, it's going to change things. So,
yeah, man, that's so awesome. Well, Portia, honestly, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I always say this, it's funny. Like when I do these podcasts, I'm always thinking about everybody else. You know, I'm like, hey, hope everybody getting some value out of it. And I always realize at the end how much it helps me, like how much I get out of it just from sharing this and the relationships that it has. So, you know, if it didn't help anybody, it definitely helped me. Just
it was so good for me too. I feel like I was sitting at a meeting all morning and I feel my spirits just, energized. So thank you.
Yeah, we're going to crush it. Well, thanks for everybody. Hopefully you guys got some value out of it, and thanks for letting us share.